If you're watching this, then you know by now a huge problem is heading our way.
Hi and welcome back to the channel. I've seen two movies this week. Both of them are not what we would call in the movie reviewing business good, but one of them is more entertaining than the other. And the other one is so bad that there's a lot to learn from it about how not to make a certain genre of film. Now, I'm still going to do the 3 movies from the 10 movies selected by the subscribers on Saturday. So that's Saturday's video, but I saw these 2 movies yesterday and I thought, I've got to get this out of my system. I've got to lance this boil and review these 2 movies, which are watchable in a way, but they're also kind of object lessons in the problems and the weirdness of making large-scale movies during a pandemic. So let's do the fun one first. The science fiction disaster movie directed by the kind of bastard prince of disaster movies, Roland, Emmerich. It was produced by Roland Emmerich's Centropolis Entertainment Company, along with several companies from China, which are all under the umbrella of Tencent, the company that makes a lot of large-scale cinema in China for international markets. They've also got a small company involved in the US, which I think is more of an anchor for the tax base than anything else. The story's pretty simple. The moon's going to crash into the Earth, for reasons that become obvious once you've seen the movie. The intro to the movie gives us a little bit of Apollo 11 footage. Then we see 11 years ago, when an astronaut played by Patrick Wilson is repairing a satellite with his co-astronaut, and something hits the satellite and smashes it to bits and kills his friend, the co-astronaut. The co-astronaut, of course, is a person of colour, and that follows through on the trope of black guys dying first in various kinds of action cinema. The other astronaut on board is played by Halle Berry, and Patrick Wilson's character has to land the space shuttle even though all of the electronics on board have gone off. He manages to do so, but there's a board of inquiry, and he says something weird hit the satellite and killed his friend. Nobody in NASA chooses to believe him, and he's on the skids for the next 10 years and ends up doing talks to school classes in Griffith Park Observatory. Meanwhile, Halle Berry's character has risen in the ranks in NASA. But then something goes wrong. NASA realizes that the moon is shortening its orbit and is eventually going to reach the Roche limit, smash to pieces, and clobber the Earth with a whole bunch of city-sized chunks of moon. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, there's a guy called Casey Houseman, played by John Bradley, who's a bit of a conspiracy nut, but he also happens in this case to be right. He has worked out independently that the moon is going to crash into the Earth, and he thinks the moon is actually a megastructure, an alien artifact covered in a crust to disguise it, which they need to go in, fix, and then the moon will go back to its proper orbit. The weird thing about this character, and there are a number of weird things about this character, is he's the viewpoint character for the audience. He's the nerdy character with the weird opinions. And also a really strange family, because he speaks with a Mancunian accent, even though his mother, who is in a hospital with dementia, speaks in a standard American accent. This is never explained in the movie because the character was originally going to be played by Josh Gad, but he wasn't available, and so they got in the guy who played the sidekick in Game of Thrones instead. Now, that isn't to say that John Bradley is bad in the role, it's just that the role is poorly written, comic relief until he needs to have a hero moment. So everybody starts pooing their pants as the moon gets closer to the Earth, and we start seeing some effects. We get gravity anomalies as tides rise, and we get enormous tsunamis, which is Definitely the kind of thing you get in a Roland Emmerich movie. We get regions of the Earth where the oxygen is sucked out of the atmosphere. Oddly enough, the pressure doesn't drop, it's just the oxygen, not the nitrogen, gets sucked out of the atmosphere, and we get a couple of adventure moments with that. Of course, Patrick Wilson's astronaut character has a child, a son, who's a teenager, and he's in trouble with the law, and he's in jail, but he's got to get him out, that kind of thing. Halle Berry has a small son as well, and they're there basically to anchor them and say, this is the reason you're going to save the Earth. So using a space shuttle which was sitting in Los Angeles and is covered in graffiti, including a piece of graffiti that says "fuck the moon," they hook it up to some leftover boosters and decide that they're going to travel to the moon, find out what is messing around with the moon. Meanwhile, disasters happen everywhere. There are rednecks in pickup trucks with guns. There's a whole bunch of pieces of moon debris hitting the Earth and shattering things. So basically everything's going to hell. So the US government arbitrarily decides it's going to try to blast the chunks of moon with nukes, even though that's going to scatter radioactive debris over pretty much the whole planet. That's their A plan. Meanwhile, the space shuttle launches in a very unusual way, and they go into a hole in the moon. Yeah. And find that, yes, the moon is a megastructure. It's an alien artifact with a small white dwarf star in the middle of it to power it, which is being attacked by a malevolent artificial intelligence, which manifests as a swarm of nanotechnology assemblers, disassemblers and assemblers. So this intrepid band of 3 people, all of whom have got their own issues, have to find a way to kill this AI swarm, rescue the artifact, and find out what's going on and get the moon back to where it was. Of course they do. I mean, this is that kind of movie. They find a way to do it. Meanwhile, the whole movie is crazy. Now, this is one of those movies that China is starting to do really well, which is really big, really dumb action films. Now, there have been good Chinese action films on this scale, things like The Wandering Earth, for instance. But there is this kind of trope in Chinese financed action cinema of really big scale, dumb action films. They use tons and tons of CG. There's green screens everywhere, and it looks green screen. And there's also a certain look to the special effects of these action films. And we also get a lot of familiar faces in this film as well. You get Donald Sutherland in a wheelchair turning up to give a bit of a backstory to why NASA basically knew about the moon being artificial from Apollo 11 days. And he gets to do an info dump there to Halle Berry's character. We get Michael Pena turning up as the stepfather to Patrick Wilson's character's kid. And he doesn't get a lot to do there apart from being heroic when the time is right. He's a car salesman, so we know that he's supposed to be flagged as a bad guy, but he's actually not a bad guy. He's just a rich guy. There are some cute moments as well. Houseman the Nerd has a cat, and the cat's name is Fuzz Aldrin. So that's kind of cute, and I kind of got on board with the character because of that. And while I was watching it, I kind of thought, yeah, this movie is scientifically, all the science is wrong. Everything in the science is dumb. All of the character motivations pretty much are stock standard, off-the-shelf character motivations. The acting is competent without being outstanding in any way. But I was having a lot of fun watching it. It's a fun, dumb movie. In the same way, but to a lesser extent, than movies like The Core are fun to watch. Moonfall is fun, particularly when the moon starts getting really close to the Earth and it doesn't break up because it's a mega artifact with incredible tensile strength. It starts rolling almost across the surface of the Earth, smashing mountains and sucking things up into space. It has an audacity of concept that I really got on board with in spite of those dumb scientific things. And at the core of it, it's got a fairly good idea. The idea that the moon is a kind of disguised alien artifact with some incredibly technology in it, which is, you know, they say it's light years ahead of ours, but light years are a measurement of distance, not of time. So I'm going to say millennia ahead of ours. and that they can do some incredible things, though they are hampered by the fact that this malevolent rogue AI that their own civilization created is dampening the power source, the dwarf star that's at the heart of the moon. They can still help out the human beings as they come in there, botch together spaceships to basically try to take out the AI with an electromagnetic pulse. It's, there's some hard science hidden in amongst all of the shit, basically. Moonfall is not going to be for everybody, I'll be honest with you there, but if you're in the mood for something really dumb, when you have in the mood for popcorn and beer, and you want to see something that you're going to go WTF about every 5 or 6 minutes, then it's an interesting film to watch. I'm not going to knock it for not being entertaining, because it is entertaining in its own dumb way. It's entertaining kind of in the same way that a video of a kitten falling off a couch is interesting. The special effects are competent without being outstanding, and you can kind of buy into it if you're in that mood for that kind of a film. That brings me to the second film, Morbius. Now, this one is a good object lesson in what not to do with a comic book intellectual property. Jared Leto plays Michael Morbius, a scientist who's a genius and who has a degenerative disease which is going to kill him. He's physically quite weak. He walks with canes, with walking sticks, and at some stage in the near future he's going to die. Even though Jared Leto is 50 years old, he's playing a guy maybe 20 years younger than himself, which is why the woman playing his love interest is played by a 29-year-old actress. Morbius has been treated since childhood by a scientist doctor, played by Jared Harris. Now, the reason Sally, my wife, came and saw this film is because she's got a big crush on Jared Harris for reasons known only to her. So along with Morbius, there's another guy there called Milo, whose name's actually Lucius, played by Matt Smith in adulthood, who has the same syndrome as Morbius himself. Morbius grows up to be a genius scientist. He invents a kind of blue artificial blood which is used in medical emergencies and kind of looks like blueberry yogurt. And so he's about to receive a Nobel Prize for his research into an invention of this artificial blood. He goes to Stockholm to get his Nobel Prize and knocks it back. The guy's an asshole. He goes all the way, he puts on a tux, he goes and walks up to receive his award and knocks it back, which happens off screen. He then finds out that bats have what his body lacks. The genetic abnormality he has can be fixed by basically bat DNA. So he goes to Costa Rica to get vampire bats. There's a scene which is in the trailer of him capturing the bats, takes them back to his lab, puts in basically a fish tank for bats, and develops a serum which can be injected into his spine, which cures his disease. Only problem is it turns you into a vampire. Now, in order to do this very, very legal experiment on himself, he gets his friend Milo, played by Matt Smith, who's very wealthy, conveniently enough, to get him a Panamanian cargo ship, which they take out into international waters. And he does the experiment on himself there, along with the mandatory love interest. The ship, for some reason, is crewed by a whole bunch of heavily armed mercenaries. Now, I know a little tiny bit about how cargo ships work. And they're usually crewed by things like Filipinos. The Philippines has an incredibly good merchant navy training school and merchant shipping training school. And a lot of the merchant ships around the world come from places like the Philippines. Not in this case. It's a whole bunch of jacked up American mercenaries for no good reason, except the fact that when Morbius goes all vampire, it gives him something convenient to kill. A whole bunch of guys who are armed in a badly lit cargo ship, because it's easier to do the special effects if you've got everything's kind of dark. Whereas I know for a fact the cargo ships, every area of a cargo ship is well lit. It's an health and safety hazard to have dimly lit holds and dimly lit passageways in cargo ships. But the movie doesn't do that. The movie does it exactly the opposite, for reasons of saving money on special effects and for looking creepy. So the ship runs aground in America. By the way, the ship is called Murnau, which is the guy who directed Nosferatu, so you've got that. It runs aground, and Morbius is the only survivor. He is, and a couple of FBI guys come and investigate him. They're played by Tyrese Gibson and Al Madrigal. And neither of those guys seem at all concerned by the possibility that there's a vampire on the loose. They're quite sanguine about that possibility for no good reason, apart from the fact that Spider-Man exists in the same universe. The female doctor who helps him is called Martine Bancroft. She's played by Adria Arjona, and she does a lot with just a little bit. The movie doesn't give her a lot of oxygen as far as character development's concerned. Meanwhile, his friend Milo, played by Matt Smith again, grabs some of the formula and has it injected into himself, and he has a few less moral qualms than Morbius does. And so he starts going on a bit of a frenzy, and he starts trying to buddy up again with Morbius. They've been friends all their life. And to be honest with you, the Matt Smith character in this film undoubtedly has feelings for Morbius. There's a little more than just friendship here, though the movie will never let you know that that's the case. Which is kind of a shame, because I think normalising LGBTQIA relationships is not a bad thing in cinema, even if that means that occasionally you're going to have basically a gay villain. But the movie doesn't do that. It doesn't have that depth to it. It doesn't have the kind of honesty to do that. So it becomes a battle between two vampires. And the special effects are kind of interesting. The face morphing that gets done when people allow their inner vampire to manifest visually is quite well done, though it gets a little tiresome after a while. There are some nice special effects where Morbius learns that he can glide and kind of fly, which looks really good on screen, though it is still all at night time. He also has a kind of echolocation, a bat-like echolocation power, along with strength, durability, and the ability to fall off buildings and crash through into basements without being hurt. Now, this intellectual property's had a long history. Originally, Morbius was going to appear in Blade in 1998, the Wesley Snipes movie, but it turns out that they didn't put it in there, which means that this guy's been hanging around the fringes of cinema for 24 years. There was an idea to put the character into Spider-Man Homecoming because Sony has the rights to that character, and Marvel Studios doesn't because they sold them off in the late 20th century. It's complicated and it's corporate. I don't want to talk about it. The film itself was originally slated for a July 2020 release, but when COVID hit and everything else, it got delayed and it got delayed again. It's only just been released now. This movie was originally shot in the middle of 2019, and reshoots were done in 2020. But with COVID and everything else, it's been delayed, which is a bit of a shame that they didn't take that as an opportunity to fix the film, because it's a dog's breakfast. It really doesn't give us the plot beats that we need to get on board with this particular intellectual property. Now, I had a bit of an epiphany about this one this morning. Good superhero movies, whether they're superheroes or supervillains, and Morbius is definitely more towards a supervillain kind of character, in spite of his good intentions at the start of the film. There are emotional and ethical beats that the character has to hit. There are moments when they're challenged physically, but also ethically and morally during their journeys. And the ethical beats in Morbius are really lightly sketched. There's a moment when Morbius has to do something really, really horrible in order to defeat his friend / enemy. And we don't get the emotional beat there landing correctly, or the ethical beat itself, or any kind of aftermath to that decision that he makes. Now, I'm not going to spoil that. It really takes you out of the movie and takes you out of any sympathy the character has created in the earlier parts of the film, and there is an opportunity there for people to feel some sympathy for Morbius as a character. So none of that lands. The end of the friendship between him and Milo doesn't land at all. And there's post-credit sequences which bring in a tangential character from earlier Spider-Man films, because Sony, when this film was released, are trying to make a kind of super villain team-up franchise of the Sinister Six. So they need several villains, one of whom is Kraven the Hunter, who's turning up in a future film that Sony is doing, because Sony has the rights to all of the major Spider-Man villains. So they're the problems. One of the other problems is Jared Leto. Jared Leto is a method actor, and he essays the disability of Morbius in an okay way for the first third of the film. But only today I learned that Jared Leto, being a method actor, pissed off the crew enormously during the making of this film, because every time he had to go for a toilet break, he would stump away on the crutches, on the kind of walking stick crutches he's got, to go to the toilet and to come back again to stay in character. This is a superhero movie. He's not Daniel Day-Lewis playing Lincoln. And so he did that for a lot of the film shoot, delayed shooting and delayed the schedule a lot by taking half an hour to 45 minutes each time to stump away to the toilet in his caravan and stump his way back rather than just walking. Jared Leto is such a problematic actor. You know, House of Gucci, he's got a lot of criticism for his Mario Kart accent. I think he really doesn't understand the fact that you've got to play a little bit bigger when you're playing the kind of viewpoint character of a superhero franchise. I mean, the best example, of course, is Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark. You also got it with Paul Rudd playing Ant-Man. You got it to a very much of a lesser extent with Captain Marvel. But if you're going to be that kind of viewpoint focal character, you've got to play a little bit big. Even if you do have a disability or things like that, you can't speak softly. You've got to be a bit more prominent. And you've got to lean into the audience a lot more than Jared Leto did in this film. So there are those problems. And of course, it's shot very darkly. Even though Morbius the Vampire isn't light sensitive at all, a lot of these superhero-y things he does are badly lit because it's cheaper to make a special effects scene which is dimly lit. If you have a look at the first Venom movie, the boss battle at the end of that is dimly lit with the two CG figures dancing around a rocket. And I think audiences are starting to clue into that and kind of go, yeah, just light the bloody movie well. Because a lot of movies are going darker and darker, and audiences are starting to notice, and they're not fond of it. The last thing that's really wrong with this film is, this is a horror movie. It's supposed to be a horror movie. It's about a guy turning into a vampire, sucking blood out of people, and fighting another vampire. And Sony really tries to dodge that. They wanted to make it, here in Australia, M-rated. They didn't want it to go kind of R-rated in the US, which is a big mistake because there's very, very little blood in this movie, a vampire movie. And there's very little gore and things like that. And I think in the modern era, if you're going to have a vampire movie where the core of it is a hero, or protagonist at least, who is forced by a mistake he makes to do monstrous things, you've got to focus on those monstrous things a lot more than this movie does. It really wimps out on the horror aspects of this film, which is a real shame because I think it could have been so much better maybe with a different actor in the lead role, with those plot beats and ethical dilemmas and ethical moments for the character strengthened, and with the movie actually showing us a bit of blood and guts. And the thing is that they had 3 years to get it right, and they didn't. And that in itself is part of the problem with the Sony kind of Spider-Man universe, with Venom and things like that. Venom was a lot more gory than this one is. So Spider-Man No Way Home was probably made a little bit after Morbius, because it's 3 years, 3 years lead time. And they did that one a lot better. Those plot beats are important, and those ethical moments in a character, whether the character pivots bad or pivots good, among the most important parts of this kind of film, and the movie just doesn't do that. A lot of people are going to see it anyway. A lot of people are going to see it when it turns up on streaming. A lot of people are going to buy the physical media of it. But I think Morbius is a lost opportunity to make a genuinely scary and genuinely meaningful kind of not superhero movie but super character movie where the character breaks bad. I'm not a fan of Jared Leto, to be honest with you. I don't like the choices he makes as an actor while he is acting. I didn't like his Joker. I don't think he's at all good in House of Gucci. And I think that even though being a skinny dude, he's perfect physically for Morbius. And that transformation Morbius has from the kind of kind scientist to basically vampire Michael Jackson. Yeah, it just doesn't work. So you see it if you want to, don't see it if you want to. Superhero completists are going to see it like me, but there are incredible amounts of things that are wrong with this film that could have been fixed had the studio had the courage to do so. Anyway, that's it for this time around. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment and hit the notification bell. You can also support the channel by going to patreon.com/paleocinema. And I am starting to put written movie reviews onto the Patreon page for Patreon subscribers only. I've got one up there now and they're only going to increase. And the value added for the Patreon people is going to be those movie reviews that I put up on that platform. So anyway, look after yourselves. Take care. Stay safe. Watch some good vampire movies. Watch some bad vampire movies. Cautiously watch Morbius if you choose to. And I'll catch you next time.